if you choose to do whatever you wish to do with an open heart and open mind, then the journey itself is transformational in ways that you can't possibly imagine. When you're a small boy or a small girl and you step out the front door and close it behind you, immediately you're walking on the face of the moon, or you're scoring the winning goal or catching the winning pass, or you're in front of a huge audience, playing, dancing or playing the violin, whatever you want. So your life transforms immediately the minute the door closes behind you. We get disabused of that as we're adults. I guess life sort of beats it out of you. But if you can find that same sort of path forward and that same sort of joy, then that journey, no matter how big it is, who knows where that ends up.
Bert terHart sailed around the world solo, using only a sextant. So no GPS, no electronic navigation, only the sun, the stars, and a unbreakable will. He is one of only 9 people to have ever have done that. And if that wasn't enough, he decided to canoe from the west coast of Canada near Vancouver to the east coast of Canada near New Brunswick, retracing the routes of early explorers. He did all of this in his early 60s. Bert is an adventurer, he's a navigator, and he has taken on some of the most grueling challenges that the world has to offer. In this conversation, we dive into his motivations, his upbringings, his time in the Canadian military. We talk about the lessons he's learned about resilience, facing fears, and the power of simply saying yes to a challenge. What I find most inspiring about Bert is that even though he's accomplished these incredible feats, he remains extremely humble. For me, it was a true privilege interviewing him. Here's Bert terHart. Bert terHart, why did you decide to sail around the world?
Well, basically, I like to do really difficult things, and I had done a lot of sailing up and down the coast of British Columbia and into Alaska, Southeast Alaska, into the Bering Sea, out to the Aleutian Islands. And I decided one day that I was going to do the most difficult thing you can do in a sailboat. I just decided I'm going to do the hard thing. And I've always been drawn to doing things that are really difficult. I was in the Canadian Special Service Force. I was formally trained as an academic. Hard things. And this is the hardest thing you could do in a sailboat. So I decided I would sail around the world nonstop using only a sextant. So sailing around the world by yourself isn't just hard enough. I did it without any electronic navigation whatsoever. So I did it with just a sextant. And, there's many reasons why, but I just decided one day I'm going to do this because it's hard. Full stop. It wasn't a lifelong dream. I didn't think, I'm going to do this. There wasn't anything romantic about it. I just picked something really hard and decided I was going to do it.
And you did, well, and you decided that because you did it when you were 60, right?
Yeah, I did it. Yeah, I did it when I was 2019 to 20. So it's 5 years later. I'm actually 66. So I was 61 years old when I finished it. So I didn't. It's really hard. It's physically very demanding. Mentally, of course, it's very demanding. But I figured if I had a boat I knew really well, so I figured I would just do that. You need many more whys than just that. But in order to do anything, you have to decide at some point you're going to do it. So there'll be 1,000 people who will tell you, no, you can't do it. It's too far. You're too old. It's too difficult. You don't have the right boat. There's a small voice inside your head that says no to everything. So somewhere between these 4.5 inches, you've got to find a yes. You have to literally give yourself permission to say yes. So I gave myself permission to say yes. I just chose, I'm going to do this hard thing. Yes. And then after that, all the other whys start rolling up. And you need to have a great big, huge barrel full of whys, because as soon as it gets hard, and it will get hard, doesn't matter what you do in life, you'll look inside that barrel or that bucket and you'll pull out a why. And then you'll throw it away. You use it once. You use these whys once. You literally don't get to use them over and over again. It's why it's so hard to get off the couch and go to the gym, right? To get fit. Because I want to look good, okay, you do that once, and the next day it's like I want to look good. It's like, well, maybe I look good enough, right? Or whatever. You need to have a new why. Like I'm going to go to my high school reunion, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be life changing or altering. You just need to have more than one. And they can be as trivial as, I'm going to my high school reunion, although that may not be trivial, or I want to change the world. So that entire spectrum. So there's no reason not to have a bucket full of whys. So, but in order to do anything, you have to give yourself permission to say, you have to literally have to tell yourself, yes, I'm going to do it. And no one else can do it. I can't tell you, I can't give you that yes. It has to come from you internally.
What were some of your biggest whys? Can you give me some of those?
Well, number one, I wanted to do something hard because I've always been drawn to doing the hard thing. There's a moral imperative to doing hard things. If you're aiming up in any way, shape, or form, then invariably the harder thing to do is the right thing to do. So that's a big one. Another one was at the time that I was sailing up and down the coast, I was following in the footsteps of the greatest cartographers and hydrographers in history. So the names like Cook and Bligh in Vancouver and La Perouse and Bodega de Quadra, all the people that were charting and mapping on this side of the coast, and it all happened at a very short period of time. So the times that the oceans were mapped is the same time that most of the land masses were mapped accurately. So they're all contemporaries of each other. My father was a land surveyor, so that had something to do with it because I was, that's what you do. You measure and map, and I grew up, with my father doing that. So it's sort of hardwired into me. And then there's, like I mentioned, I was formally trained as a scientist, so this was an opportunity for me to do some citizen science, which I'm a real advocate for. So I was doing macroplastic surveys. I was doing current throwing things over the side, measuring surface current drifts in really difficult parts of the ocean. I wanted to see if I could do it. Like one of the whys was, can I actually do this? Am I physically, mentally, and emotionally capable of doing it? One of the whys that I just literally wanted to go to all those famous places, at least sail past them, because anybody who's ever sailed, well, I shouldn't say that. Anyone who's ever, back in the day when, Cook and Bligh and Vancouver were doing their thing, and up until the Suez Canal was built and the Panama Canal was built, the only way around the world was to sail around the five Great Capes. So I wanted to do that. I wanted to see the ocean, because it's totally different. I wanted to see, there's a romantic kind of Bernard Moitessier, Joseph Conrad type of, Herman Melville kind of, albatross. There's, surrounded by albatross in the Southern Ocean. These amazing creatures that live and thrive in the most hostile environment in the world, including Antarctica. So there's all those sorts of things. I wanted to, on a really trivial note, for example, I wanted my kids to say that my dad's tougher than your dad. So I mean,
I think we all have a little of that.
yeah, we all have a little of that. I wanted, obviously, I wanted to do something that would make my dad proud. I mean, quite again, it's a whole range of things. So, I wanted to. My father was a sailor. Well, he had in the Dutch Merchant Marine. He'd been around the world. Certainly not in those parts of the world. But I wanted my father to know that, that he had raised me right and he had done some good things. And then I wanted to, it turns out that I was writing a lot, so I wanted to bring something back of that experience. And I didn't want that experience to be technical. So, I put up this sail or I put up that sail or I steered this course or that course. There's something to be learned about going into those crazy wild places and coming back. I mean, every major religious tradition in the world has incorporates someone going off into the wilderness and coming back and learning something, being tempted in some way and coming back, not necessarily a different person, but coming back with a certainly different perspective on life and where you might fit in. Um, I've been into difficult situations before, and they tend to be thin places. What I mean by that is that you're separated. The distance between you and that which is far greater than you is very, very thin. So when you live in a big city, for example, the thing that separates you from, say, the divine is huge because you're surrounded literally by all of humanity, and sometimes the best and sometimes the worst of humanity all clumped together. But if you can remove all that, and there's nothing except you and and what's obviously larger than you. Just think of a mountain. So you're going to go spend some time alone on the side of a mountain. It doesn't take you very long to realize that you're a very small piece of this of a very large puzzle. So, and I know that from other experiences. And one of the things that's interesting about that is not only does your consciousness tends to collapse into you because that's all there is, and in that same moment, your consciousness is also expanding into something that's far greater than you. It's this idea of, in the Buddhist tradition, it's this idea of becoming one with all that's around you. Not that I'm a Buddhist by any stretch of the imagination, but that's kind of what that feeling is. So there's something very interesting going on in those places. Is this contraction or this yeah, a contraction into yourself, and that contraction also coincides with this expansion of you into everything around you. And in a city, it's very hard to expand in everything around you because you're surrounded by tens of thousands of people, giant pieces of concrete, and clearly, it's hard to expand into someone else's conscious. Thank God, because that would be a horror show. But yeah, so I'm giving you like literally just blasting out a bunch of whys, and not in any order because it doesn't matter. You just reach into the bag of whys when you need it, and then pull one out.
Let me ask you this: on a why, once you pull that out of the bucket, do you when you put it aside and pull up another why, do you ever pull up that why that you had before, or is it discarded?
It's it's not discarded. You get a completely different perspective on it. So let's say that, for example, you well specifically, let's say that I pull a why out that's related to my relationship with my father, or my sisters, or my friends, or whatever, and then everything settles down. I don't have to go into the why bucket again. That it never goes away, but it comes back in a different perspective. So the relationship that I would have with my friends and my siblings and my father, they all inform each other. So if I'm looking at my relationship with my dad, for example, or my brother, that new perspective I have then informs the relationship I might have with my friends. If I'm so maybe more less esoteric would be afraid, because you will be afraid. If you're not afraid, you're a psychopath or a sociopath, or worse, both. And if you're not afraid, you're in the wrong place, because that just means that there's a certain amount of hubris and arrogance that's going to kill you. It's like Mark Twain says, it's not what you don't know that gets you; it's what you know for absolute sure that kills you. So, you 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 will be constantly reinforming all these, or you have new perspectives on all the things that you're examining over and over and over again. So fear, for example, how do you deal with being totally afraid? Who do you lean on? How do you lean on them? What can you do? So this idea of how you move through fear, is something that you can then use to move through all the rest of your life. So, for example, if you're really, really afraid of something and you can't do it, like the idea of when you're typically afraid is that the gap between where you are and where you think you need to be or think that you have to do becomes very large. So, as an example, in sailing, um, I would be, I knew in certain situations that if I didn't get outside and do something with the boat was actually gonna just be, I'd sail it to pieces. It's like getting in your car and just stomping on the gas, closing your eyes. Pretty soon you're going to hit something and the car is going to be destroyed. It's easy to destroy a car. Anyone can do that in a flash. So it's very easy to destroy a boat in the middle of the ocean, a small boat in a large ocean. You can sail a boat to bits. So I'd be in a situation where I knew if I didn't do something, the boat was coming apart. But right now, in the moment, you're safe. I'm strapped in down below, and I'm relatively warm, relatively dry, and outside it's just a maelstrom. So I'm good where I am. and that and I'm literally afraid to go outside because outside is incredibly dangerous. The boat's mostly underwater. You have to be strapped into the boat. You can't move anywhere or do anything without being tossed around violently. So I'm good where I am, but I need to get outside, and I'm afraid because I know what outside is means. So how do you go from you're very, very safe to you're very, very dangerous? Well, I would just simply break that task down into the smallest possible step. And your mind literally can't tell the difference between do I lay down or sit up? Well, if I need to get outside, at some point I have to sit up. But when I'm thinking about getting outside, all I'm thinking of is how terrible it is out there and how good I am now. I would have to break down getting outside into the smallest possible chunk. And then you're not afraid of doing that. I'm not afraid of sitting up. I'm not afraid of, moving across the cabin. I'm not afraid of, going into the place where I can put my boots on. I'm not afraid of getting into the place where I can, put my foul weather gear on. I'm not afraid of getting out to, where I can slide the hatch back and get outside. I'm not afraid of taking a step outside and hooking up. So these constant little steps moves you from the place where you're paralyzed to the place where you're actually doing something effective. So you can use that same analogy, or that you can use that same methodology in any context you want. So we talked about getting fit. I need to get fit. Well, I got to go to the gym. Well, that's a long ways away. I got to get in my car. I got to drive. I don't like the gym. I don't like the people, blah, 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 blah. But the first thing is I got to get up off the couch. Instead of laying and watching Netflix, I can sit up and watch Netflix, because there's no difference, right? Well, then I can turn the TV off. Like, what's that? I'll turn the TV off, and maybe whatever the case might be, whatever you're watching. So you just whatever it is you need to do, you break it up into the smallest possible steps and keep taking those steps. Keep, moving up, as it were. The goal is to get outside, right? The goal is not to, so that's aiming up as opposed to, going back on the couch or getting back inside. If you keep doing that, eventually you'll get to the place where you want to be. And again, this little voice that keeps telling you, no, 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 it's too hard, it's too far, you're safe. It doesn't know the difference. I mean, it's always there. Never get away from it, but it's incredibly stupid. You can fool
Mm,
it very easily, right? It's not very sophisticated. Just
right.
get it down to the smallest possible step. Um, so again, you would use that same simple step when you pull, same sort of thing when you pull a Y out. You only have to look at it from a slightly different angle, and then it becomes a whole new perspective on it. Like, you only have to twist it a little tiny bit like this, and you can keep pulling the same Y out and using the same method to get a slightly different perspective on it, right? So yeah, it sounds very simple, but it's unbelievably effective.
So like the way you deal with fear, the way you, like you mentioned, you're in the boat and you have to go outside and do something. You're safe in the moment, but you have to do something. Where did you learn that? Did you have that before you went on this trip? Where did you learn that in your life?
Well, I mean, part of it is I was in the Canadian Special Service Force. I was in the Army when I first, when I went to military college. So that's the equivalent of, for us, it would be the equivalent of West Point. So, you guys have three military colleges, you have USAFA, Annapolis, and then West Point. We have all the services are wrapped up into one. So there's basically one military college, all the services. So, in the service, in the infantry, in the Army, the idea is if you shoot from a position, right, everyone knows where you are. So you have to shoot and move. Like, we used to call it shoot and scoot, but the point is, um, if you're behind a rock, you're safe, right? But I might shoot from behind the rock, but now everyone knows where I am. So the thing I have to do is move from a place that's relatively safe because I'm behind the rock, to a place that's unsafe. It means I have to expose myself as I scamper to, say behind a tree, whatever the case might be. So this idea of you have to be, taking these little steps, moving from a place that's safe to, that's relatively safe to a place that's safer, involves moving through a place that's potentially more dangerous. So that was the first inkling of it. But you actually need something that you can use repeatedly in situations other than somebody shooting at you, because that's a very extreme example. So it wasn't until I was actually I used it in business, but again, not I didn't have it hardwired like I have it now. But the point there was, um, it would take me 20 minutes to put a pair of shoes on, to put my boots on to go outside. That's how hard it is to move around the boat. So you're actually breaking it down into the little tiniest steps. I can move from A to B to C to D to E to F to G and end up actually in a place where I can put my boots on. So I actually had to formulate a plan to make that happen. And then it's kind of like this light bulb moment where, okay, I get it. I really understand how this works, where you might have been beating around the bush before in business or even in relationships. So, and I used the same principle when I was actually going. So in order for me to plan the trip or plan anything, I have it's a 4-step principle: plan, prepare, practice, persist. And that loop brings you back to plan. And if and which is exactly what we're doing with what I was doing with breaking things down into these little tiny steps. So I would break things down into little tiny steps, plan, prepare, practice, persist in that step, and that brings me back to my plan. Am I still headed to the place where I can put my boot on? Am I still headed to a place, if it was business, is my where I am at now, is that still commensurate with the overall plan I have? And if that's true, then you keep doing this positive feedback loop. And the beauty of that, as odd as it might seem, is that when you end up in a place where you have to stop or you have to quit or you have to turn around, it's painfully obvious. Um, so you have to, if you were to climb a mountain, for example, at some point you have to realize you've got to turn around or you're going to die. And if you're planning, prepare, practice, persist, if everything is working, you're persistent getting up the ice fall, for example, and everything is still good, then you can do that. You can plan the next move. You can prepare for it. You might practice and you persist in doing that, and you end up back in the same place, which is planned. The next handhold, for example, this is this positive feedback loop that drives you up. And when you get to the point where you realize that everything you've done now isn't going to work, then turning around becomes very, very easy. Because I've tried to sail to certain places I mean, this summer I completely failed in getting to a place I'd wanted to go to for 3 times before, which you'd think some guy who can sail around the world should be able to sail up the coast, to an island that's maybe, 1,000 or 1,500 miles away. It turns out that's incredibly hard, and when it comes time to turn around, it's incredibly obvious. Same thing in business, the same thing, and for example, when you're raising kids, you have a plan, you prepare, you practice, you persist, and you're going up, and then suddenly that's no longer working, as in they become teenagers, right? It doesn't work anymore, so you got to come up with a new plan. And it's painfully obvious that the plan you had when they were toddlers isn't working when they're teenagers, right? So it's a really powerful paradigm. It's very simple, but I was able to not just conceptualize it, but formalize it and codify it, I guess, because I'm a programmer, into to how we're talking about it now.
You're the way you describe that, I can tell you're a very technical person. You
Yeah,
took this trip with a sextant, right? And I had to look that up when I was like, what exactly is a sextant?
yeah,
There's so many words you'd used on other interviews. I'd listened about you on. You talked about these instruments, and the sextant, just for people that don't know, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but it's essentially how they navigated in the past. Like it's how Christopher Columbus. It's what he used when
mhm,
at that time. You didn't use any electronics. Nothing like that helped you navigate
mhm.
this entire trip, which you just wanted to make it even more challenging for yourself. That's how I see that.
Well, one of the things I wanted to do was I wanted to get as close as possible to the experience of the people who had done it before. And it's very hard to do because the food is different, the boats are different, the sail is different, the clothing is everything is different. What is identical is this idea that you're lost. So we as humans are hardwired and have been hardwired for a long time to know where we are, to know how to get from A to B, to have these maps in our head, to be able to navigate really, really effectively. Because if we didn't, we'd all be dead. Because you wouldn't know from day to day where the best hunting was, or where the best berry patches were, or where to go to get the right mixture of mud and clay and water to make a pot. So we would just be dead. And it's one of the reasons why Google Maps is probably one of Google's most it's probably their most profitable aspect of their business. This idea of maps is so important to us. It's why in this day and age, people will get on their phone and ask the directions to the local grocery store because they want a map to show them. That's why there's a new map. There's these maps in every car. But if you want to understand what it was like to travel around, back in the day, just throw everything away, walk in the forest, close your eyes and spin around 3 times, and suddenly you're lost. And that visceral, terrible gut feeling that, oh my God, I'm going to die, is the same as it was, with every other human, for the last 10,000 or 50,000 or even 100,000 years. Most people are afraid to go to sea, not because of the ocean, but because there's no land, and therefore there's no landmark, and therefore you're lost, literally lost at sea. Um, So this idea of navigating like them means that you're lost. You're lost almost all the time. Your position is always a best guess. And in order to find out where you are, you were using the same tools that people who were concerned about where they were have been using for a long time. Starting like Christopher Columbus used a form of the sextant. It's a quadrant. Basically, you're measuring the angle between the horizon and the sun or the moon or the stars or planets. Not all the stars. There's only a certain set that are bright enough. But the point is, figuring out where you were north or south of the equator was very easy. Figuring out how far east or west you were was very hard. So when people learned how to figure out how far east or west they were of some particular place, then mapping the world just exploded. We talked about that earlier. So all this happened in a very short period of time. As soon as people figured out how to go east or west or where that was, then the whole world was mapped all at once. And it's an incredible piece of history actually, and it speaks a lot to the human condition. It speaks a lot to how unbelievably good these people were, but you can get very close to their experiences of those guys doing it by getting lost. So when I paddled across Canada, for example, I didn't use no electronic navigation. I just took maps that I had made and a compass. So same sort of thing.
Yeah, well, we'll get into that too. You've done two really incredible. I mean, it sounds like you've done several things in your life that are very uh, inspiring to, I would say, a lot of people, me included. Those two are, I mean, those are headliners, and we'll get into that. I wanted to ask you, let's say Christopher Columbus. When I pictured that story of Christopher Columbus, they go, he's going to go west, and he's going to run into India. Uh, I think most people think when they picture him that he was very courageous. What do you think about that whole Christopher Columbus just going west? I tend to think like it was a suicide mission. Do you think he was worried? Do you think he said, I can turn it around and I know how to get back if I need to? What do you think about that?
Well, I think that Christopher Columbus he was one of the only people in the world at the time that was interested in sailing around or through the world that thought the world was flat. So just about everyone at that time, I shouldn't say just about everyone, but there was a good chunk of the of people who were interested in sailing who thought the Earth was round. And Columbus had actually come across some old charts by that had been created by the Chinese when they went on an expedition before Columbus around the world around 1425. All those records were actually destroyed when the dynasties changed as things want to happen. Everything before is no good. Everything now is new and better. So anyway, so he had some idea that there existed something to the west of Europe, and he thought it was India. He thought it was basically, well, I'll just sail there and we'll get to in the vicinity of China. But of course, they had no idea, even the Chinese, of how far what that was, how far west you actually had to go. Although the first person to actually measure the diameter of the Earth was an Egyptian way back, almost 3,000 years ago. An interesting way he did it, but he estimated the world was basically 25,000 miles in diameter, and he was right. He was right within basically 1 or 2%. So there was this body of knowledge that the Earth is round. It's actually bigger than you think. Columbus was unaware of that, but he knew there was something west, which is why he decided he was going to go west and he'd hit something. But the ships were very slow. The navigation was basically, they knew how far east, they knew how far north or south they were because it's the North Star. The North Star is always at the same height, at the same latitude. So he was just got on that latitude and then just went straight west and traveled very slowly because they were traveling slowly. The boats were slow. And he wasn't going to come back. He was going to go west until he hit something. And he hit something, had no idea where he was, why he called it the West Indies. He thought he was no. And the same thing happened in Canada. Um, when Cartier first came to Canada, he came to a place in Montreal, basically straight north of New York, and there's the rapids in the St. Lawrence River that he called the Lachine Rapids. That's China. So he thought just beyond the rapids would be China. So he too was a little bit wrong in how far west he was,
Yeah,
because they had
just a little bit off.
just a little bit off. In the same way that Columbus, and he was 100 years after Columbus, basically. So this idea of how far east or west you were was a big deal. So Columbus wasn't coming back. He was going to go west until he hit something, but he thought it would be, a relatively short trip. And I'm sure you know that, by month three, everyone's suffering horribly as they did in those days. And it was close to mutiny. And every day they were praying to their God or to God. They were Catholic, that it was going to be that today would be the day. And luckily, when things were, which is the way it is in life, when things are the bleakest, when it's the darkest just before the dawn. So suddenly he ends up, at this place, and then basically you follow the trade winds around, because he was going straight west in the trade winds. And if you follow that same, the same global atmospheric circulations, the trade winds and the westerlies, you end up back in Europe, which is what he did. So it was basically a by guess and by golly trip.
Your route, I heard, because I listened to a couple and I was trying to understand your route. You went from where kind of Vancouver, you went along the Pacific, the coast down to South America, Chile, I guess, and then you headed east
Yeah.
and went. Mhm.
Yes. So the only way to do it is to go through the Southern Ocean. If you go nonstop around the world, you can't go through the Suez Canal or the Panama Canal because you stop. Therefore, the trip is not nonstop. So you go from basically the west coast of North America, you head southwest, sort of towards Hawaii from where I am, because then you actually have to go upwind through the southeast trades, which is very difficult. So you go southwest and then go straight south, and then you go start going southeast until you get to the bottom of the Americas at Cape Horn. So basically, you go south to the bottom of the Americas, Cape Horn. Then you go through the South Atlantic to the bottom of Africa, which is, people think it's the Cape of Good Hope typically, but it's Cape Agulhas, which is a little bit farther south. Go through the Southern Ocean till you get below Australia, Cape Lewin. Then you go south beneath Tasmania, which is Southeast Cape. Then you go south again through till you get past, or I'm sorry, east again until you get past and underneath South Cape, which is the bottom of New Zealand. So it's the bottom of America, the bottom of Africa, bottom of Australia, bottom of Tasmania, and then the bottom of New Zealand. And then you're back in the Pacific Ocean. So basically, you go down and then around and then back up again.
When you came back around, did you kind of angle yourself to get back home, or did you kind of go to where you started and then go
Well,
back
it's
north?
the winds are contrary. So and when you go around the way that I did, beneath all the continents, the winds are west. There's no landmass down there. So I'm below all the continents. There's the only there's imagine there's a circle. There's the continents, and then there's Antarctica, and there's a band of water, the Great Southern Ocean, where there is no land. So the weather there is wild because it's not at all impacted by the land. The weather systems are much different than they are here in the northern hemisphere. So not only because you're in the south, but also because there's no land. So you travel through this vast oceanic wilderness where there is no land beneath all the continents, and because it's westerly, the winds are generally westerly. So you're actually going downwind, downwind more or less. And then in order to come back to where you start, you have to go against the wind. So, there's a southeast trades and northeast trades. So you're actually having to thrash your way upwind, which is why you can't angle directly backwards. Everything in a sailboat, when you're going against the wind, is sort of, you're going a little bit this way, that way, this way, that way. It's a little bit like when you are climbing up a mountain on a road, there's all these hairpin turns, right? Where you kind of are wiggling your way. It's exactly the same thing with going upwind. It's too hard to create the road that goes straight from the bottom of the hill to the top. You have to do all these hairpins. So that's the same thing sailing against the wind. You can't sail directly against the wind in the same way that you can't just drive straight up the hill. They don't put the road that way. The grade is too high. You got to sort of work your way up. So you got to do that to get through to get through all the primary wind systems. Like we all know, we all hear about the trade winds, right? The trade winds in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. So they blow very constantly in the same direction, and it's contrary to where you want to go if you're going north or if you're going south. So you've got to work your way through the trade. So it's never a direct route. You can never do that. So that's why the circumference of the Earth is 25,000 miles, but I ended up going, basically 30,000 because of all the wiggling back and forth.
That trip around the world took you a little longer than you thought it was going to take you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what happened there?
Well, I I had thought I would take 7 months. So that's 210 days. I thought I'd bring 240 days of food, so 30 days extra, and it took 265. So it took a little bit longer because of firstly the weather. Um, I was I spent 50 days becalmed, not all at once, but over the course of the whole trip. So 50 days means that the boat's not moving. And you're still running out of everything. You're running out of food, you're running out of water because you leave with everything on the boat for the most part. You can get water, you can collect water, but all the food has to be on the boat. 50 days becalmed means that, and if you travel roughly 100 miles a day, which is my average, that's 5,000 miles. So I was, which isn't, which is it's to go from the bottom of the Pacific to from beneath New Zealand back to Vancouver is like 8,000 miles. So basically, one entire ocean basin I spent sitting on my hands, eating and drinking, running out of everything. So there's that. I was becalmed, and I chose to sail a little bit farther north than typically. People who are doing this, they sail a little bit farther south. So if you sail a little bit farther south, the winds are stronger, and the distance is a little bit shorter because, of course, the Earth is a globe, and the farther south you go, it's the diameter is smaller. But in order to be safe, I wanted to sail a little bit farther north. So I was going to be slower and I was going to be exposed to more contrary winds, but I didn't expect to be exposed to so many calms. So, and Suburban itself, the boat I went with, the only boat I had, of course, is a relatively slow. So there's a bit of a, kind of a perfect storm, as it were, of weather and, route planning and things like that. So, um, but again, I was concerned about sailing the boat to bits. So you can be hungry for a very long time. You can go a very long time without food, but you can't go a very long time in the middle of the ocean without a boat. So I figured I could run out of food, but I didn't want to wreck the boat.
Yeah, yeah, you don't want to wreck the boat for
Yes,
sure. And
exactly.
I think I heard that you said that that the oat, because some people may think, oh, he's fishing for
No.
for fish, right, and supplementing food, but you said it's like a desert out
Yeah.
there. Is that? Uh huh.
Yeah. Yeah. The open ocean is basically a desert. There's very little food in the open ocean. Like all the food is concentrated along the continental coasts. It's why the Grand Banks of Newfoundland is nothing but this huge cod fishery. It's why people are fishing along the continental shelf for things like tuna. It's where, all the salmon, for example, are primarily concentrated along the coast, which isn't, I mean, they migrate, of course, but so the open ocean, though, is there's very little food there. Because there's not a lot of nutrients. The nutrients basically in the ocean are flushed into the ocean by rivers, and then obviously there's no rivers in the middle of the ocean. So and there's very few coastlines. So and there's been things that we have done as a species that have caused a collapse of some of the pelagic fishes. So the pelagic means, large fish that swim in open ocean. So there's been I wouldn't say a complete collapse, but there's certainly been a degradation in a number of fish that are those kinds of fishes that are living in that part of the world. And where I was sailing in the Southern Ocean, it's cold. It's not like, you're near the tropics where it's warm. There's more fish just because it's warmer. There's more sunlight. Therefore, there's more plankton. There's more of a base of a food chain. So, and most of the commercial fishery is constrained to those areas. There's places in the Southern Ocean where they're fishing for squid, as an example, but again, those are in very few places. So the majority of the open ocean is a vast desert. Like the visibility in the middle of the ocean is, how far you can see down to the bottom. Of course, the bottom is like 4 kilometers away, so you can't see the bottom. But the point is, if you can see down to about 200 feet. So and if you were to go along the coast, you're lucky if you can see down 15 feet. Like that's, oh my God, the visibility is amazing. It's because there's nothing in the water column. There's no little fish. There's no tiny plankton. There's no debris. There's nothing really to occlude or to cloud the water column. So because there's nothing in there, it's like looking through a glass of water. There's not a lot living in the glass of water that you have. So it's a desert. I fished for a very long. I dragged something behind me for, I don't know, probably 8,000 miles and didn't catch anything.
Nothing.
Nothing.
I picture if you fall off a boat, you're going to get eaten by a shark.
No.
I was like, if you're in the middle of the ocean, that's like a big fear of people. And
Yeah.
there's no sharks out there,
No.
nothing like that.
No. Like
No.
if you could, it's different if you're traveling sort of east to west or east to west or west to east in the trades, where it's the tropics, where there's where it's very warm, and there's islands that are never more than 2 or 3 days away, maybe 4 days away. But in the Southern Ocean, the nearest land is thousands of miles away from you, 10,000, 50, or not 10,000, sorry, but 1,000 or 1,500 miles away. So you could fall off the ocean. You could fall, you would want to be eaten by a shark by the time you've been falling
You'd
off the
want to
boat
get
long enough. Just put me out of my misery. No, there isn't that.
That's wild. But there are birds out there, you said, right? I mean,
Yeah,
what are
yeah.
these birds eating? Are they just navigating? What are they doing?
They're typically eating, like an albatross eats squid there, or small squid. But there's lots of small little creatures in the ocean that these that birds eat. So the bird life, like the amount of birds in even in the Southern Ocean, even though it's degraded by maybe a factor of 4 or 5, maybe even 10 in some places, there's still, by an order of magnitude, still it is shocking. Like whenever I wanted company, if I was becalmed anywhere and I'd wanted company, I could take a piece of toilet paper and throw it over the side because it would float long enough that because it doesn't belong there, that it would attract birds. And once one bird lands, then every other bird lands. So when I was becalmed for long periods of time, or sailing through the same area for the same period of time, I'd see the same birds over and over and over and over again. And it's incredible, and they are incredible company because they're always around. And some of them would fit in the palm of your hand. And they're at sea anywhere from 1 year to 3 years before they return to land, typically two. Even these little tiny guys, and they're perfectly suited to the most extreme environments. And they go from those that are fit in your hand to the great albatross, whose wingspan is about 12 feet. And you'll see them. They might flap their wings once every 30 or 40 seconds. They'll get on the face of one of these giant waves and basically surf down this wave. And the waves are big, and they travel, at about 30 miles an hour. So these birds get in front of this wave and just go back and forth. And the wave, literally one wave will travel basically for thousands of miles, these big oceanic swells in the Southern Ocean. Then they'll get in front of them, and then they'll just go back and forth until they run out of until that wave becomes part of another wave. And then they'll just get off the back like a surfer. They'll get off the back and then get on another one. And when they see something, it's amazing to watch them. I looked at them for hours and hours and hours, wondering how it is and what they're eating, until I saw it happen once. And then when you see it once, you see it sort of all the time. So, but they're tremendous company, and they are there by the tens of thousands, if not millions. But of course, you don't see millions at a time. But they're incredible company, and they're easy to. They love to follow the boat because they think there's something to eat, but they are fussy because I tried to give them canned sardines and canned tuna. That's so they wouldn't have any. They're much smarter than me because I was living on that kind of stuff, and they wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot beak.
They don't want that. They want
Didn't
that
want
fresh
that.
stuff, I guess.
Yeah, they're too smart.
When you're out there, I mean, you're out there for several months. Do you get lonely out there being by yourself for that long?
There's a real difference between being alone and being lonely. There's a wild difference between the two. So I was alone but never lonely. Well, firstly, you're very busy. There's too much to do to be lonely. If you're lonely, there's a certain element of lonely where you might be feeling sorry for yourself, and that's I was made a conscious effort never to be that way. I had put myself in that situation. There's only myself to blame. So, who are you going to blame for where you are when it was your decision, right? So
Yeah, you decided to
it's
go.
I decided to go. So it's an easy trap, right? And of course, at some point I felt sorry for myself, but you always drag yourself away from that very quickly because there's always something to do. You have to do something. And I never felt alone because um, what was interesting, and I hadn't expected this, was that I had the ability to email people because I had a small satellite tracker. I had a very low bandwidth connection back to the world, which allowed me to send email back and forth and take pictures. I could send a low bandwidth picture back. No one could send anything to me. That was the limit of what I had. So, um, and the rule was if you emailed me, I would email you back. And it got to the point where I was spending a lot of time emailing people because they were genuinely, these people, I had no idea who they were. If they fell out of the sky and hit the windshield of the car, I wouldn't know who they were. But they were genuinely, sincerely interested in what I was doing. But more importantly, they were completely and utterly invested in me succeeding. They wanted me to whatever that success looked like to me. They wanted me to succeed in that way. They weren't saying you have to do this in order to be successful. Whatever it is, however you choose to define success, we wish that on you. We hope and pray and want you to succeed in that way. So it's pretty hard to feel lonely when there are literally thousands of people hoping and praying and cheering you on. So you just can't feel lonely in that environment. You can't. If you are, then there's something wrong with you. Um, and it became incredibly motivational and inspirational for me to not that I felt I had to live up to that, but to know that I was being buoyed up by all these people. It was really interesting. I didn't expect it at all. It wasn't why I was doing the trip. It just ended up being one of these things that's an interesting part of humanity. And in other contexts, I've seen that doing other things since then and before that. You realize that this was sort of helping you along the way before you were actually really cognizant of what was keeping you going. So no, I was never lonely. Certainly alone, but never lonely.
Sounds like you found love in a way
Yeah.
in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, it's you can be very cynical about the state of humanity. That's easy to do. And there's lots of there's lots of things around you that might want you to believe or convince you that the state of humanity is that they basically were just it's just one big cynical lie. But you can't do what I have done and come away with that. It's just impossible. And you don't have to do something as wild as what I did. You can do something far easier. You just have to step outside your front door with an open heart and an open mind, and you'll find that exact same thing. I've been in places that are really, really close. Um, and you would think, and the people are unbelievably kind. They'll just do anything for you. Uh, uh, they'll give you the shirt off their back. They'll give you the last thing they have to eat. They'll just to help you on your way and just for no other reason than this is at the moment it seems the right thing to do and the kind thing to do. It's what you mentioned earlier about raising your children. You want to do something kind, right? And of course, you want to do it for your kids, but it turns out that the limit of your kindness is not at all bounded by your immediate family or by the people you know. It's almost unbounded. And if you find yourself in those situations where um, where you're not just exposed to it but open to it, it's shocking how good humanity can be. And it's very hard to be cynical about that. And in a way, just like you said, it's a way of finding love in a, you know, like I guess as the song goes, you're looking for love in all the wrong places.
Yeah. You went on this journey for for yourself, and you created, it seems like you created this, at least in others, this love that maybe wasn't there. I'm sure I can almost guarantee, I can see myself as them, just praying for you every night
Mhm.
and thinking about you, and had so many people thinking about you as you're going through this. And I could see how you would be if someone was lonely in a big city. I could see you in the middle of the ocean being like one of the least lonely people
Mhm.
in that area. So
That's really interesting that you'd make that comparison because I think the loneliest I've ever felt was watching a hockey game where there's 22,000 people, watching the Vancouver Canucks play. It's like being in a football stadium. There's 100,000 people in the football stadium, and you could fall out of the stands and no one would notice, right? They're not there's nothing wrong. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but there's a massive disconnect in that context from 100,000 people. It crammed into a very small place. You might all be cheering for Texas A&M, but you're still one of 100,000. You're basically a nameless, faceless, entity in a sea of humanity, which can be a really lonely place, you can be really lonely in a city, like surrounded by humanity, just like you say. And I've certainly felt that I certainly felt lonely in those circumstances.
so so your last name terHart. I think you're Dutch, right? The
Yeah,
family
yeah,
is Dutch,
yeah,
and your dad was a merchant marine. I heard this wild story that he proposed to your mom. Uh, she was like an ambassador, and then this is before you were born, and then you guys moved to central Canada into the plains there north of North Dakota near Fargo.
yeah,
Uh, that's far from the oceans.
yeah,
Obviously.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's a story in and of itself. I mean, my father was in the Dutch Merchant Marine, and he had at the time you were navigating with the sextant, like that was the way to do it. So he had mapping skills because the all of the world was mapped with a sextant, all of it. Um, and after it was initially mapped, of course, the mapping technologies got more sophisticated, but initially it was all mapped very, very accurately, with a sextant. So my father knew how to use a sextant. So he decided that when he left the Merchant Marine, he decided of all the places he'd sailed around the world, he wanted to live either in Portland or in Canada on the west coast somewhere. But in order to get to Canada, you needed to have a job. So it turns out that my grandfather, my dad's dad, knew somebody who lived in Regina, which is in this, central part of Canada on the plains where I grew up. And that job was painting a house. So my dad immigrated to Canada with like $200 in his pocket, and his job was going to be to paint a house. But he had skills, and he applied at the Department of Natural Resources and the Canadian Geographical Survey, which both those government entities were involved with surveying. So my dad's navigation skills would translate directly into surveying skills. And he originally applied for the Coast Guard, but they said you've got to wait 5 years, to become a Canadian citizen, a naturalized citizen, then you can apply. And Dad said, I don't have 5 years. I've got 5 days. So I'll be finished painting the house in 5 days. So he
Yeah.
he applied to the Department of Natural Resources and the Geological Survey and got on one day, and the next day in the morning he got the job with the with the Department of Natural Resources. In the afternoon, he got a job. They offered him a job with the Geological Survey. He wanted to work with this Geological Survey. He figured that'd be more interesting. But he was a principled man, my hero, as he was, as your father was for you. So he said, "No, I already have this job. I've already accepted the job with the DNR, Department of Natural Resources," and they shipped him off to northern Canada to almost the Arctic Circle, surveying. You can use a sextant. We'll teach you how to use the same sort of technology, instrumentation on land. So instead of measuring the angles vertically, from the horizon to the sky, measure them horizontally, between objects. That's surveying in the elevator pitch for surveying. So, and while he was there, my mom was working in the Dutch embassy. She was, at the time that they got married, she was secretary to the Dutch ambassador to France. So she was a very accomplished woman, very cosmopolitan. Um, and my dad showed up. They knew each other when they were younger. So my dad just didn't show up out of the blue. So they were corresponding, and my mom was supposed to go to Peking. That was her next posting, and my father, who'd been to the Far East, figured that wasn't the place for a young Dutch woman. So he flew, saved up all his money, flew from Uranium City, basically northern Canada, to Paris, and asked my mom to marry him. And then she moved. They got married, and then she moved back to Canada in the prairies and spent the first 3 weeks or a month crying because it ain't Paris. Let's put it that way. So it ain't Paris, but
That is That's wild. That took I you know, I have family members and friends
Mhm.
where I believe it too. It's that happy wife, happy life.
Yeah.
That for her to come all the way to central Canada, she must have
Yeah.
been in love with your father. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
Completely head over heels.
Yeah, there must have been something about that because that was and she had other options, so that my dad was he was a very handsome man. He was I guess he must have been very charming. So there they were, middle of nowhere, and we ended up, I asked my dad, well, how did I end up in Estevan? And he said, well, once he got his, once you get qualified as a surveyor and you can sort of you have the right or the legal right to go out and survey because there's it's like being a doctor. You have to be the legal right to become a doctor and practice medicine. In order to practice his craft, he said, "Well, I'm a surveyor now." He looked around at the map and said, "Where are there no surveyors?" Estevan, Saskatchewan. There are no surveyors there. I'm going to go there because I can make a living there because there's no other surveyors, and the surveying is a legal requirement for all kinds of things. So you need a surveyor. Then and it's really interesting because my father taught me that in order for you to be successful at anything, certainly business, you have to meet your customers where they are. So my dad, he said, there's no surveyors. I'm going to go to Estevan because there's no surveyors there. I'm going to meet my clients and customers where they are, as opposed to me saying I'm going to some big city and then having my customers come to me. That never works in any context. He said, I'm going to go there. And he made a living, made a reasonable living for he raised four kids and in this little tiny town, and I certainly have no regrets living in that place. But that's how I ended up. That's how my dad got from, and he left a very prestigious job. He was a first officer on one of the largest shipping companies in the world. So, and he left that all behind to come to Canada and paint houses. So there's something to be said about that as well.
Yeah, he sounds just as adventurous as his son, it
Yeah,
seems like.
yeah, I blamed him. He said, when he ever said, "Why are you doing, why are you doing such stupid things?" Stupid things, his words. I said, "Well, you can only blame yourself. It's your fault.
It's
You
your
made me
fault.
do it." Yeah,
That sounds like something I would tell my son. You know, it's
exactly.
like kind of a rub, but kind of like a prop too. You
Yeah,
know, it's like I'm proud of
exactly,
you, but I got but I can't. I got to give you a little dig too. You know.
exactly.
So you were born there, raised there with your siblings, and then what happens? You go to California for a little while.
Yeah, I
Did that mhm.
right out of I joined the army right out of high school. I was 17 years old, and at the time, um, that was the only I didn't. I wanted to be an oceanographer. My father has salt water in his blood. He taught us to sail. We were constantly trying to paddle a boat or sail something, floating around on something. So I grew up sailing and being on the water. So, and I caught the bug more so than my brother and my sisters. So I wanted to be an oceanographer, and the only way to get an oceanography degree at the time was to go to military college because there was an undergraduate degree that was being offered, for people who were willing, to go to military college. And obviously the career trajectory from there was to go in the Navy. So that was my idea. So that's why I left home very early when I was very young, joined the Canadian this armed services thinking I was going to be in the Navy, but I'm almost completely colorblind. So I was disabused of that by the powers that be, because I can't really tell. Well, I'm almost completely colorblind. So they said to me, hey terHart, you can't be in the Navy. Too bad for you. But the good news is you can be in the Army or you could be in the Army. What is it you want to do? So
Wait,
uh,
of these two, huh? Oh my
of these
goodness.
two things, yeah. So that was it. I wasn't going to quit. I had decided I was going to see this. So I got a degree in oceanography. I got 2 degrees in oceanography from there. Well, no, not true. I got a double major in physics and physical oceanography as an undergrad, and then immediately went into the Army, which of course doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But um, there's no regrets about that at all. Actually, being in the Army was a wonderful experience. I think it certainly helped. Certainly created a foundation that enabled me to be successful in many other areas and other contexts. Far beyond what you would imagine. And it's always the same in my mind. If you engage, if you choose to if you choose to do whatever you wish to do with an open heart and open mind, then that the journey itself is transformational in ways that you can't possibly imagine. So, and that, when you're a small boy or a small girl and you step out the front door and close it behind you, immediately you're walking on the face of the moon, or you're scoring the winning goal or catching the winning pass, or you're in front of a huge audience, playing, dancing or playing the violin, whatever you want. Your life transforms immediately the minute the door closes behind you. And that's because whatever you're stepping into, whatever you're doing with an open heart and open mind. And we get disabused of that as we're adults. I guess life sort of beats it out of you. But if you can find that same sort of path forward and that same sort of joy, then that journey, no matter how big it is, and this, even if it's just stepping out and going, stepping out of your front door and talking to a neighbor and putting a smile on their face, that whole, it's like throwing a rock into a pond. That tired analogy of the ripples going out from there. Who knows where that ends up? But it's if you think, and maybe it's hard to understand, but if you think of the opposite, you step outside the front door with a closed heart and a closed mind and just growl at everybody you see, that you bark at everybody you see, nothing good comes of that. Nothing good. And that's easy to understand. The other part of it, the flip side of that coin, because it seems so trite and esoteric, is harder to believe. But both are true. Both are equally as true.
Yeah, I tell my kids that I was trying to picture it how I'm gonna describe it to them, but I say the world is a mirror.
Uh-huh.
Okay, um, if you're mean to people, if you lie, you cheat, you steal, there's going to be a reflection of that back towards you. People aren't going to trust you. People aren't going to like you. Uh, and the opposite is true, I believe, too. If you're good to people, if you're open, if you're honest, if you always try and do the right thing, people will reflect that to
Hmm.
you. So the world is is so the control in that situation is not really other people,
Yeah, of
right?
course.
It's not, the world is this. I'm like, if you're not happy with the world, if you can change yourself, if you can focus on yourself and change some maybe habit or something about yourself to where it becomes the world that you want it to be, it actually becomes the world you're gonna want it to be. So that's kind of what I try and tell my kids sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's really sage advice, because to take a step back from that and as have that as an abstraction, because I'm only concerned about the things that I can control. Certainly and you can learn this lesson very, very quickly when you're in an extreme environment when everything is out of your control. And there's nothing malicious. There's nothing malicious about a giant wave or a mountain. A mountain is beautiful, and in the same breath, it can kill you because it's a very inhospitable place. You can't survive on the face of a cliff, when it's in the middle of winter. All these things. So although it's incredibly beautiful, it can also be incredibly dangerous. But there's nothing malicious about it. It just is there, and it is everything on that is beyond your control. The only thing that you can control is you. And it turns out the only thing that you need to control is your reaction to those things that are happening to you, because most of those things that are happening to you are outside your control. And this idea of a mirror is that when you see something happening to you and you reflect that back into the universe, if you will, into nature in a very negative fashion, then you're only going to get nothing good comes of that. It's the same way that you're walking down the street and you see a dog, right? And you kick the dog. Nothing good
Mm-hmm.
comes of kicking the dog. That's nature. You don't have any control that, you're walking down the street and there's a dog. Like, what are you going to do? I mean,
What are
it
you gonna do?
sounds crazy, but you're exactly right about it. And this idea of reflecting is just a matter of, what can I control? If you look in the mirror, what can you control? You can't control the reflection, but you can control whether you're smiling or not. So if you smile back at yourself, okay, that's a pleasant picture, right? That the world might see, or you can, bare your teeth and raise your fist, and that's a different thing. Then you can't control the mirror, right? None of that is in your control. All you control is how you react to that, and how you react to that is what people see. That the idea of a reflection of you described, and I think that's a really good way to teach kids. I think about, or anybody for that matter, because everyone can imagine looking in a mirror and punching it. punching yourself in the face in the mirror, nothing good comes of that.
That's not gonna feel good.
Nothing's going to feel good about that. So yeah, and it's a very important lesson. It's a very hard lesson to learn. Everyone, there's two things in that. One, living in the now, because you hear that all the time, and it sounds simple, but it's really hard because we're constantly impacted by life, and you're living in the city is a thing example we talked about. You're constantly impacted by the sheer enormity of the number of people, the size of the buildings, the traffic, the sheer volume, the noise around you. It's hard to scrub away all the noise of the lives that we lead. So I mean, if you ask most, most people are. I mean, there was some on social media. Some were saying they had this big thing. They were going to put their phone away for five. They're going to start with putting their phone away for 2 minutes. They weren't going to answer their phone, and we're going to look at it for two, and then maybe over the course of the next 6 months, they're going to get to an hour or something crazy. But that's just nothing more than that's simply saying that it's so hard to remove all all the aspects of our lives as we live it today to get back to something that's more well, I shouldn't say get back, but to maybe to reflect something that's a little more important than um, what's on your phone at that exact moment.
So you joined the army. You're there for how long are you there? How long are you in the army for?
Almost 10 years, and then I went straight to graduate school. I worked for a very short time as a research scientist, basically as studying large period waves in the ocean. I knew I was not cut out to be an academic. There was just no way. I mean, it was too political for me. I went from a pretty political environment in the army to what I thought would be an apolitical environment, and I was as wrong as you can as you can be. Um, so and a friend of mine who we're still friends asked me because I had programming skills asked me if I would help him with the clinic that he was starting in California. So I and because I can't say no to things that I'm passionate about, interest me, I said yes. And I wasn't so keen on being an academic. I knew that wasn't going to work. So off I went to California. I lived in the Santa Monica Valley for a while, and then down into Laguna Beach for a while, and then eventually had to come back to Canada because of the visa that I was on, and because we had sold the clinic. So um, came back to Canada, and then I went to the West Coast. I came back to the West Coast with a software company that I'd started and developed.
Why did you choose the west coast of Canada? And it sounds like did your family come with you, or at least your like father, brothers,
Well,
sisters?
my father and my mom and dad were already living in Victoria, which is this is close to Vancouver, and I've always loved the coast, and I always wanted to go sailing. I always my as you know I when I was at graduate school and when I was going to work as a scientist, I wanted to go to sea. I wanted to get on a boat and go measure stuff. And at the time, the Canadian government sort of ceased all funding to that sort of research. So there was no more getting on a boat. It was more sitting behind a computer, which didn't interest me. And over and above that, being an academic didn't really interest me. So I came back to the coast because and I'd always loved sailing. So this is a place I could sail. So that was the draw, the primary draw.
Yeah, I've never been to Vancouver, that part of the world. I've been to Seattle, but I've seen like the Olympics
Uh-huh.
and pictures of that area, and it just I knew somebody. Um, I'm not sure if it's like that in Vancouver, but I knew somebody from Alaska,
Yeah.
and he was in college. He grew up in Alaska, and he'd been quite a few places, and he told me one day, he says, I finally figured out what's so beautiful about Alaska that you really can't find most other places. And I said, what was that? And he said it's the only place he's ever been where the ocean meets the mountains. It's the mountains are right up against the ocean, and most places that I've ever been, it's the mountains are off in the distance, the Rockies. But he goes, in Canada, that it's breathtaking.
Uh-huh.
I think they have some of the most beautiful cruises for that reason.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, he's exactly right. There's a few places. I mean, it's one of the reasons why people like to go to Polynesia because the mountains, these tropical, volcanoes are extinct, well, volcanoes extinct or otherwise, There's obviously a coral reef surrounding them, typically in an atoll or something like that. But it's beautiful for all the same reasons. And the other thing I would say about, as you go farther north from where I am, so you go north, say to the top of northern British Columbia, it's wild. And then it goes, as you get into the panhandle of Alaska, it gets to be rugged. And then you get out to the, you get out towards the Aleutians and it gets to be primeval. There's something, it looks like everything was made yesterday. It is an incredibly breathtaking, beautiful place because it is so unbelievably inhospitable, and at the same moment, it's unbelievably beautiful. And it's a wonderful place to sail. Because there's a lot of history here, which attracts me, of course. But then there's it's beautiful beyond, almost beyond imagining. If you look at some of these places, and it's all accessible from a small boat if you're careful. It's an amazing place to be. And Alaska is, there's so much variety there. There's so much variety in that particular state. It's got to be one of the most beautiful places in the world.
This it's a nice dovetail into my next topic that I wanted to talk about. So, you sailed around the world. You were the uh, one of only 9 people that has ever done that in history. That's with a sextant. But you're the first American, right? So that's ever done that. Um, and then after this, you decide to trek from Vancouver, the west coast, all the way to the east coast of Canada,
Yeah.
and you're only the second person to have ever done that. But this time without a dog. The other person took a dog, and you went by
Yeah.
you went by yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. The guy who did it before me from coast to coast, this guy's name is Mike Ranta. He's just a machine. He's just this incredible, driven individual. And he he took his dog with him. He did it. He didn't just do it once. He actually completed the trip once. He tried two other times. One time he got stopped short on the East Coast. The other time he got stopped short on Lake Superior. But he went with his dog. And I would say, I would tell him, you went with your best friend, so it doesn't really count. But of course, it does count. Yeah. Mike is just, anyway. He's a fantastic. He's a really. He's one of these really good guys. He's just one of these guys that you can be. He doesn't suffer fools, so as long as you're not an idiot, then you're going to get along with him. But he is an amazing individual, really interesting. But yeah, I decided I came. It was, again, I had mentioned earlier that all of certainly all the world, and certainly most certainly all of North America and South, all of North America was mapped using a sextant. It was mapped at the same time that Cook and all these guys were going around the world and surveying that. And it's they're also contemporaries of Lewis and Clark. Lewis and Clark were doing exactly the same thing that Thompson and Mackenzie and Fiddler and Turner and all these other guys were doing in Canada. So I decided that I would wanted to do something in the same vein as this round the world expedition, in terms of figuring out what people did, how they experienced it, what it was like to do that in those times, and get as close as humanly possible to their experience. I decided I would take the old fur trading route across Canada from coast to coast. Um, so I did that in one season in a canoe, portaging and paddling across the entire continent.
Yeah, and portaging. I looked that word up. My portaging is so. This is so that people that don't. We're gonna go over a few things here, but just so people know, portaging. And tell me if I'm wrong. Is when you're navigating between two bodies of water,
Correct.
right? So you start on the west coast. You canoe as much as you can up or down a river, and then you portage. You basically pull your canoe. It was a canoe, if I
Yeah.
recall right, and you're walking with this canoe. I assume I picture it like it's got wheels and it's got a rope, and you're pulling it. I assume you're going through trails or a road to the next one, and then you keep doing this all the way to the east coast of Canada. Did tell me how I got that wrong or right?
Well, portage is a French word. It just means carry. So in some places, it could be around a set of rapids, and in some cases, in this day and age, it's around a dam. In some cases, it's going from one lake to the other. In some cases, it's going from one river system to the other. So you have to carry your canoe in some way, shape, or form. And the traditional portage is literally it's on your back. You literally pick the canoe up, put it on your shoulders, and walk from one place to the next. Carry the canoe from one portage the canoe from one place to the next, and it can be as little as 30 meters, a little as literally as 100 feet. You have to get it across this waterfall that you can't, or over this waterfall, or around this waterfall that you can't paddle over without, wrecking something or losing everything or drowning. And in some cases, in my case, it was as far as, let's see, 300 kilometers is 180 miles. So the longest time that I pulled the canoe. So they're either carrying it or I had a cart. Like you said, I would put the loaded canoe on a little cart so I could drag it from one river system to the other behind me. And the longest one of those dragging episodes was about 170 miles. So that was, so I did that.
Yeah, that's like worse than an Iron Man. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You gotta have to be full covered in full Iron Man tattoos. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. So I pulled the canoe behind me for about 1,100 kilometers, or what is that? That's about 700 miles. Not all at once, but in different chunks. The longest chunk being about 170 miles, and then carried it. The typical on your shoulder for something like maybe 120 miles over the course of the whole over the course of the whole continent. So there's a lot of
How heavy is this canoe? How heavy is that
well,
canoe?
the canoe is actually pretty light. The canoe is about 42 or 43 pounds, maybe a bit more with all the stuff on it. And then I had about 140 or 50 pounds of gear. So the loaded canoe and the cart weighed over 200 pounds. And of course, I carried the cart with me all the time. The cart was in the canoe. So when I came to a portage that I actually had to carry the canoe, I would take 9 trips. So if the portage is a mile, I would actually turn that 1 mile into 9 because I would have to go there and come back, have to cut the trail because the portages were typically overgrown and not in use. So I actually have to do a bit of a recce, go there, come back, cut it both ways because you got to walk both ways. Then I would carry a pack there and there and come back, carry another pack there and come back, another pack there and back. I had 3 packs, and the last time was with the canoe. So I would whatever portage when you're carrying, I would turn whatever that distance was into 9 because I had to make 9 trips.
So that 700-mile one, um, was it like 1/9 of 700, or
No, that's I'm pulling the canoe behind me in the cart, so the loaded canoe is in the cart. That's one trip. But when I was carrying it on my shoulder, not using the cart like down a trail or around a set of rapids or over a waterfall or around a waterfall, I'm sorry, then it's 9 trips. Anywhere from 7 to 9. If I didn't have to go there and cut it, then it would be 9. But walking through the city, for example, walking through Ottawa, going around, the dams and all that. I'm walking through the middle. I'm walking downtown with a dragon, a canoe behind me. I walked over, down the transcontinental highway in Canada, with the canoe behind me, dragging it behind me. So I got stopped by the police actually a lot for doing that because you don't see it every day. A guy, and because I was, because I had to buy the clothing is very important. I mentioned that, mentioned clothing, and I was careful about the clothing, so I bought everything on sale. When it was on sale, I'd buy this stuff, and it ended up being always some wild ass camouflage that no one else wanted. So I'm walking down the highway dragging a canoe, not something you see every day, wearing some crazy camouflage, which you look like the Unabomber, I think, going out to blow up to blow up something. So I was always stopped by the police.
I was about
And
to say, it looks like this guy just came out of the mountains. You
yeah,
know, did you have a beard? I mean,
no,
did you? No, you shave every day or something?
it's easy. Like one of the things you can't get is you can't get sick. If you get sick, you're done. So, and one of the best ways to stay healthy is to stay clean, which is to guy cut my hair. I don't have much hair. I'm pretty bald, and cut my hair with scissors and shaved, when I felt I was getting too scruffy. The other thing too is that you come out of the bush and you're meeting people by yourself. Like it's different if you come out of the bush and you're with someone else, then people don't automatically assume that you're a mass murderer or something like that. But you come out of the bush by yourself looking pretty scruffy and crazy camouflage, people are usually taking a step back because they're in the middle of nowhere too, right? I've had people lock the door. They see me coming up the road and they're locking the door. Because yeah, you have to ask permission if in the middle of nowhere on somebody's who's living off in the bush and they know everybody. Like if you in these places, even though they're isolated, they know everybody and they see you coming and they don't know you from Adam, and you're looking pretty marginal. So I was doing it one to make sure I don't get sick, and then two to at least appear presentable because it's a bit of a thing in this day and age to be thumping around in the middle of nowhere.
I'll tell you what I think. What saved you was that canoe. If they saw a guy with a canoe there, he's not, running fast. This
Well,
guy, he's doing something.
okay, I guess I'm in a little town called Portage la Prairie, Portage, which means it's an old. I mean, this was named by the French Canadian fur traders, and you're going from one river system to the other. I was going from the Winnipeg River to the Red River, and that's across the prairie. So Portage la Prairie. This is the Prairie Portage. It's long. It was about 36 kilometers, so 40. That's like 25 miles. And I get to this little town, and of course I'm always hungry. And I I park. I'm walking through town, pulling a canoe behind me. I park. I get out of my harness and I get out. I leave the canoe in front of this convenience store, and I go in the convenience store, and I'm buying what you can eat, which is basically jerky and pepperoni, dried meat that I can use, as I can't get otherwise. And policeman comes in the door, and he looks at me, and I look at him, and I know he wants to talk to me because I'm the guy in the camouflage, right? And he looks at me and he goes, "Oh, that's your canoe outside." I said, "Yeah, that's my canoe." And I said, "How did you know?" He said, "Well, you're the only guy whose my wallet was a dry bag, like a little bag that's waterproof, pulling out nickels and quarters to pay for stuff." And I said, "Well, why are you coming to talk to me?" He said, "We got a call from someone who said that you stole the canoe." And I look at him and say, someone thought I stole that canoe. And he goes, "Yes." I said, "That was the dumbest idea I think anybody could come up with, because I'm not sure how you can make a quick getaway walking down the middle of the road, pulling a canoe behind you that you stole. But someone called the cops thinking I'd stole the canoe, and he shows up, and there you go." So,
Because they're like, who is walking around with a canoe? There is no one
yeah,
that is walking there. It's on the back of a car, back of a truck. This guy's walking down the
down the
street with it.
road. Yeah, he
Yeah,
stole it. Like this is my big plan. I'm going to walk around with an empty cart until I see a canoe somewhere, and then I'm going to load it on the cart and keep going. Yeah. Well, to anyone who's listening, I don't suggest that strategy if you're looking for a new canoe.
oh my God. How
Yeah.
quickly would people, like, I'm sure you ran into a lot of people on this trip and they're like, what are you doing? Like, how quick was the change? Like, oh, I'm just going across Canada. And people are like,
You could never say that.
no, you
No,
can't. Uh
no,
huh.
no. When people ask me, what are you doing? I'd say, well, I'm just on a trip. And they said, well, where are you staying? And I'd say, this is where I'm going. Like the next stop, I think, oh, maybe a couple hours, then I'm going to stop, right? Or maybe if I knew where I was going, I'd say I'm going to go there. Where were you yesterday? I'd say where I was yesterday. And then if they have to ask like 7 or 8 questions before I'd say that I'd come all the way from here or where I'm going. So I learned early on that, if I wanted to end the conversation, like when that gets stopped by the police, for example, they say, "Where are you going?" They always ask where you're going. I'd never say New Brunswick. Like I wouldn't be in Wyoming, for example, and say, "Where are you going?" And I'd say Massachusetts, because
Like,
then you're
they throw
going to
you in the
jail.
asylum, dude.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're
that's
going to the
right.
asylum.
So I would never say that. They'd have to ask way more questions because that the reaction is like you never. I mean, people aren't going to be aggressive or violent, of course, but it's it's their impression of you varies widely from crazy person to something else. So If there was a casual interest, they'd ask one question, where are you going? And I'd say, well, to this next place, 2 hours upriver or whatever the case might be. But if they start to ask way more questions, then you sort of, as they're asking me, I'm sort of expanding their horizons of where I've been and what I'm doing. So there's been some really funny stories around that about, but yeah, I wouldn't just immediately bust out like, where did you start from? And let's say that you're in upstate New York, and they say, where did you start from? And you go, California. They go, yeah, of course you did. Me too, right? And then
They didn't believe it. Yeah,
no,
they
it's a
wouldn't
little hard
believe
to
it.
believe, right? It's really
Yeah.
hard to believe.
Did you have any of those stories where someone was just really, curious and just kind of open
Oh, yeah,
on
yeah.
this?
Yeah, there's lots. People are when you're like, you have to frame everything. This isn't any different than any other conversation you have. And if you want to have if you want to have a really meaningful interaction with someone, then you need to frame what it is you want to say in a way that makes sense to them, right? You can't just bust out all this crazy stuff that you've been doing, or you're thinking of doing, or you're attempting to do, because that just makes you look like a wild man. But when when it's framed, and it depends who, of course, who you're talking to. So when it's framed correctly, then in a way that they can understand, or not understand but relate, because it's almost impossible to relate to someone who's going to spend 7 months walking across a continent, living in a tent. That's, literally, my tent was the size of a water bottle, because that's all you could. It would fit into basically something like a water bottle, because it had to be light and small and portable, and I had to carry the thing, 9 times, right? So it's very hard to relate to that. So people have to get some sort of foundation where they can sort of that they can launch themselves into some place that where they can relate to what it is that you're doing. And if you tell them anything else that you've done, then it gets even worse, right? So it's it's not hard to do, by any stretch of the imagination, but it's something you have to be aware of, certainly when you're engaged in something like that. Um, if Elon Musk tells you, "Hey, I'm gonna build a rocket ship and send it to Mars," you'd believe him. But if I said, "Hey, I'm going to build a rocket ship and send it to Mars," even though I might be working for Elon Musk as his chief scientist, no one's going to believe you, right? So you got to sort of frame that conversation so that they can find some sort of, common ground. So, but once you find that common ground, then it becomes a really, really beautiful conversation. And I mean that in every sense of the word, because the way that people would relate to whatever it is you're doing, and so out of my own autobiography, whenever they would relate to what it is I'm doing, there's no way in the world that I can presuppose what that is. I can't possibly imagine what it is that's in their life that's going to allow them to relate to my life. And when they find that common ground, and we sort of start orbiting around it, then that gives me an entirely new perspective on what I've done. And that makes it incredibly rewarding, because there's a perspective I never would have had if I hadn't talked to that person, right? Because no way could I presuppose what that perspective is, and I can't possibly imagine it because I'm not that person. I'm limited in my own little box. So talking to other people and allowing them the room, and the grace to breathe and then to relate, gives me an unbelievable. It makes my own experiences far richer, because I get a perspective I never could have imagined before. So it's unbelievably. It's not just rewarding; it's motivational and inspirational in its own way and its own right.
You talk about inspiration, you talk about motivation. There's a long trip. You had a lot of experiences on it. Is there any moment on this trip that you recall that was especially touching, was especially um, have some significance to you?
Well, I think that there's times when you've managed to remove all of those things that sort of impact your life, that are, I won't say fluff, but aren't immediately necessary to living in the now. Like, worrying about what's going to happen a month from now isn't very productive. It's nice to plan, it's nice to think, it's nice to aim, but I have no control over what's going to happen in the future. It's out of my control completely. So focusing on those things that are completely out of control are counterproductive in the moment. So when you can actually live in the moment, then the world again sort of collapses and expands at the same time. And living in that moment is there's a divinity in it that's hard to describe. There's very little that separates you from the things that are far greater than you. And finding those moments are depending, in the context can be unbelievably emotional, they can be unbelievably spiritual, they can be unbelievably enlightening, they can be unbelievably profound. You can experience, I think, joy and beauty. You can certainly experience the beauty of the natural world in ways that you can't do. Looking out of your fourth floor condo, across the mountains in Vancouver, although as beautiful as it might be. So there's those moments are those moments have sort of seared into my soul, and they're some of my favorite. And they can happen in really different, wildly different ways. So one of the ways that can happen that's really almost, I won't say trivial, but you hear, or I've heard all the time, that the ocean has moods. The moody ocean. She referred to the ocean as a woman. You have it has this emotional content that that men typically lack. So certainly me being a technical guy, so I remember being in the Southern Indian Ocean between storms, because the storms come after you one after the other after the other. Unlike the Northern Hemisphere, in the south, there's only cold fronts, so there's not this gradual progression of a storm coming, and then suddenly the storm is there. So you have the cloud cover that lowers and lowers, and the wind picks up and starts to rain, and the rain gets more severe. There, you have these beautiful, beautiful, sunny, calm periods, and in the next instance, you're just getting kicked. So it was in this calm before the storm, literally the calm before the storm. And I was outside, and it was for no reason other than I was just looking around, just trying to enjoy the moment. And it's as if in an instant it's as if literally as if God had, or a God, if you will, had passed his hand over the oceans, because the mood changed like that, just like that. And if I'd been down below, I wouldn't have noticed it. But being up top, out in the cabin, looking out over the ocean with an open heart, literally because I was just relaxing before what I knew was going to come. Suddenly, the ocean just changed its mood, just like that, for maybe 2-3 seconds, and in that same amount of time, it was gone. It's taken me 10 times longer to describe it as it was to experience it. And I realized at that moment, that I'd been entirely wrong about firstly me being, say, I wouldn't consider myself to be a romantic in any way, shape, or form at that point. But I realized that in order for you to recognize the ocean would have a mood and change her mood like that, has to be some sort of romantic living in you. And secondly, that it was true. And thirdly, I had no part in it. It just happened completely independent of me, other than me looking at it. And I've looked out at the ocean long enough to know what her moods might be, whether it's, I wouldn't describe them as moods before. They were just changes in the weather, or changes in some current pattern, or something like that. But that's what I would call the thin moment, and sort of made me realize that there's certainly, again, one of those thin moments that separates you from all that's far greater than you. And it's there all the time. It's just whether you're able to see it or not. Uh,
So you were out on the boat. Sorry, I'm trying to understand this a little more. And then it was calm, and then it changed
mhm,
quickly,
mhm.
and then it went back to normal.
It went back to normal. So there's various states of calm. When you're at sea, it could be a glassy calm. It could be that there's no wind, but there's just enough wind to ripple the surface. Or it could be it's calm, but there's always some waves, because even though the wind dies down, it doesn't mean the waves go away. The waves are always there. And actually, some of the worst moments you can experience are when you're becalmed, when there's no wind, because there's nothing steadying the boat, even though the waves are always there in the Southern Ocean. There's always a large swell traveling through that. So large swell, I would mean by um, a large typical swell in the Southern Ocean is in the order of 18 to 20 feet. So that's the height of the wave. And then, when it gets really going again, there's another 18 or 20 feet on top of that, which is the wind waves. So the wind waves go away, but the swell always persists. And it's not the swell is usually coming from at least two directions, so it's chaotic. So when there's no wind, the boat is just getting bounced around mercilessly. So it was calm, which means that there was next to no wind, but there was still this the surface of the ocean was still very chaotic. And I was outside looking at the surface of the ocean, even, and it was in close to the evening, so it was, the sunset. I was facing going east, so the sun was setting behind me, so I had this beautiful sky and sea, but it was chaotic in a way. And suddenly all the chaos just disappears. All of it goes away. And 3 seconds later, all the chaos appears again. So it's literally if someone's looking at you laughing and they stop, and then 3 seconds later they're laughing again, or someone's angry, and then 2 seconds later they're not they're smiling again. So suddenly there's that mood is the same as this presence of this chaotic sort of surface, and then it's suddenly everything is calm. And in the same way that someone who's might be angry at you, suddenly their face changes. They become there's a calmness that comes over them, and they start smiling, and then they just go right back to being angry again for reasons you don't know and beyond your control, because you're just sitting there in that one spot and you have no control over any of that. So that's what that was like. This sort of this chaos just disappears and comes right back again. So in that moment, he just the mood of the mood of the whole my whole ecosystem, everything around me changed, and then came right back to what it was before. So it was the before, the change, and then the same as before again.
How had you ever experienced? You've done a lot of sailing. You ever experienced
No,
that before or after?
never again after. Never, but my perception of what was happening around me had been was informed by that by that experience, by that episode. And there's nothing, like I mentioned earlier, there's nothing malicious or malevolent about it. It just is. And we often attribute things, we often attribute those things to have some sort of malice to them. Like, why is this happening to me? Why is this storm? How come this storm has to be here when I'm here? How come it can't be somewhere else? Why is it raining when I need to, do this? So we attribute, we attribute these things to have some sort of anthropomorphic malice, which get there's a human element to it that's against us in some way, shape, or form, and it just isn't that at all. So it, the things that I had observed in that time, there was no malice in it. There wasn't threatening in any way. Even when the surface of what I described as chaotic, there's nothing threatening about that. Certainly nothing threatening in the sense that it's out to get me. I mean, it can be threatening in the sense that if you're willfully blind to it, then it'll kick you around for a while. You have to be aware of it, but you can't be willfully blind. But there's certainly no malice in it. And then, when it gets to be when the weather is very nice, you could be thinking, okay, well, it's just trying to lull me into a false sense of security, so then it'll kick me in the rear later on. But it isn't like that. So
And how about did you have an experience like that when you? I mean, sound like two completely different experiences, right? You're on the ocean, you're on water, you're isolated in the boat, versus walking and hiking through mountains, streams, cities. Um, was there a moment on that trip that stands out to you?
yeah, sure. There was other similar moments. I mean, I remember paddling across this lake, and I've never been on anything that is so calm. And at that moment, I was feeling sorry for myself because it was very hard. Like, this is the trip across Canada was in some ways was harder than the trip around the world, just because of the mental demands. Um, and it takes its toll on you, right? And you feel, actually you can feel more lonely, because you're going through places where there are people, and there are families, and there are couples, and there are friends, and you're moving through that environment just completely and utterly alone. And you have no you're not part of that world. You've literally chosen to remove yourself from that world, but every now and then it slaps you in the face, where if you go to see it, it never slaps you in the face, so you don't see anybody. So you're constantly being reminded that you've chosen to do something very solitary, and by definition that should be lonely, right? So um, I remember feeling a little bit of that, and then suddenly on this lake, I've never been on anything that was so calm. It's literally like standing on a mirror, literally and figuratively, obviously. So I'm on this mirrored surface that's as far as I can see, And at the all around me are these mountains, these gorgeous, beautiful mountains, and everything is this incredible color of everything is imbued with what I would call blue. And it was extraordinarily beautiful. And I felt at that moment that was there just for me because there's no one else there to see it. And it happened in an instant because a body of water is never completely flat like that. And certainly something that's of that size. And it was shocking at suddenly how beautiful it was. So I said, how can you possibly feel that's a D.H. Lawrence quote, made famous in the movie G.I. Jane, or half of it. And that quote goes, I've never seen a wild thing sorry for itself. A small bird will drop frozen dead from a bough without ever having felt sorry for itself. So here I am in this thing is suddenly, I'm just hit upside the head with how incredibly beautiful and serene it is, like literally this mirror that I'm on. And I said, how can you possibly ever feel anything but joy in that moment? So that was one. And the other one was, you're constantly worried about where you're going to spend the night because um, you just can't spend the night anywhere. You can't just go, oh, I'm going to get off the river here and it's going to be a perfect camping spot. It never works like that. And I worried the minute I got up and started paddling or moving to where I was going, I was automatically worried about where it is I'm going to stay that night. And not just where you're going to stay, but if something happens that gets you off the river or the lake, you have to get off now. If it's a storm or if it's a thunderstorm or the wind or whatever happens, you might need to get off the river and maybe you'll be pinned in that place for the next 5 days. You don't have any control over that. So you're constantly assessing where it is I can get off the river, where it is I can get off the lake, where it is if I'm portaging down the road, down the highway, where can I get off the highway? I can't just I stayed in the ditch, I've stayed in a garbage dump. I've done all these crazy things because there's no other place, right? And I realized pretty soon I realized about halfway through the trip that every time I needed a place to get off the river or off the lake to be safe, there was one there, even if it was a garbage dump. But when I needed it, was always there. And I stopped worrying about it when I realized that when I needed it, it was there, full stop. And my worrying about it. And I had a very systematic way of rating campsites, everything, so that I knew I would rate campsites between 1 and 5. So as soon as and the river changes all the time, despite what you might think. So I'd rate campsites from 1 to 5. So I knew that that the nearest campsite, maybe for example, if I hadn't seen a campsite that I would rate higher than 3 for the last hour, then I probably wasn't going to see something that would rate higher than 3 for the next hour. So if I had to get off the river now, I knew where the nearest campsite was that was a 3, the best one. And if I had to get off the river, if I saw a 3, then I'd get off because I hadn't seen a 3 for the last 4 hours. Where if you've been paddling along and every potential campsite you see is a 5, then I know that the next campsite I see is probably going to be a 5 and I can get off at the next one. Or conversely, if I hadn't seen a 1 for the last 3 hours, then as soon as I could get off the river, it didn't matter what it was, if it was going to be a mud bank or it was going to be a garbage dump or whatever, I didn't care. I was getting off the river. And I would spend a lot of energy rating campsites, paddling down wherever I was going, thinking that if I have to get off the river, because you need to be safe, because you can go without water for 3 or 4 days, you can go without food for 70 and still live, but you won't last 24 hours in the bush if you don't get shelter. So you have to get shelter like right now, and when push comes to shove. Same in the desert. You're not going to last very long in the desert if you're just lying there in your shirt and and shorts overnight. So when I realized I was spending all this energy, and every time I needed a place, there was one right there. So I was wasting my time. And for some reason or other, that was just, I realized that there's maybe something, greater than you might be helping along the way.
Wow. You were worried about something that you never really, I guess, had to worry about in the end. How far into that trip did you stop worrying about it? In the
About
beginning or towards the middle?
oh, just a little bit before halfway. So I was gone for 6.5 months, and so by 2 months or 2.5 months, I stopped worrying about that completely. Completely. The only thing I worried about was getting permission, because sometimes the only spot would be on. You knew that there would be, if it wasn't public or if it was private land, it was pretty obvious. You'd go looking for someone to ask permission, because that's just the proper thing to do.
So the ocean trip took a little bit longer than you planned, and this trip across Canada took a little bit less time than you had planned. Is that right?
Yeah, I was concerned about finishing the trip across Canada because of weather. I had to start in basically late winter on the West Coast, and I knew I'd finish in early and late fall on the East Coast, but I was a little bit quicker. Um, and that it didn't start out very quick. It started out very slow because there was the water conditions were very poor. There was a big basically there was very little runoff on in the rivers going in central Canada, so that meant I was traveling very slow, and there was very little water. So I was in, the river tends to go meander back and forth, but I was actually meandering in the meander. So as the river's going like this, I'm going like this in the river between all the, between the sandbanks. So it was slow, but I was able to make up some, to make up some time. So I was very lucky, and I got some help too. So that made a difference.
What do you hope people take away from your journey? People that hear it.
Well, I think there's one fundamentally, you're never fundamentally you're never too young or too old to reach out and engage with in a very meaningful, profound way with whatever dreams you have. So it doesn't matter how crazy your dreams are, whether it's sailing around the world or paddling across the country or sailing to the Aleutian Islands. No matter how crazy they are, you can do it. You just have to find you yourself have to give yourself permission to do that thing, and whatever that thing is, then you can do it. And you have to be and if you do that with an open heart and an open mind, then everything about that journey or that adventure is going to be transformational. And it doesn't have to be big. Like we confuse extraordinary with the grandiose. The word itself, extraordinary, means just a little tiny bit outside of ordinary, because extra can be a little big, can be very big or very small. So if you like, and as a young child, we talked about this, you step outside the front door, close it, and automatically you're on the face of the moon. So you take a very tiny step outside your front door with an open heart and open mind, and suddenly you're in a completely different place. And you can do that just walking outside your front door and looking at a blade of grass, as far as I'm concerned, because we certainly don't have a very good explanation of how the blade of grass arrived at that place. It's a miracle beyond all miracles. And we don't have a scientific explanation for how that we might have an explanation of how that piece of grass might have evolved. We don't have a really good explanation about how it got there scientifically. So there's these profound, really interesting, there's these profound mysteries around us all the time that are beautiful. Like you can't look at a flower or a lily and say, oh, that should never grace the, that should be removed from the face of the earth. How ugly is that thing? So we have all this extraordinary beauty around us. We typically don't stop and look at it, but that's a journey in and of itself. It's it's like Walden stepping into the woods, and writing about it and just marveling at how incredibly precious it all is. So, which isn't to say that we have to be, eco warriors by any stretch of the imagination. I'm simply saying that you don't have to go very far for you to have some really interesting adventure, even if it's misadventure. Like things can go wildly wrong, and it still can be very interesting. So you need to be if you're so the other thing. So there's that, whatever your dreams are, then you should probably get on it, because you're not gonna. None of us is gonna last forever. The other thing is that you need to be well and truly divorced from what you hope the outcome is, because it probably will not be that. It's probably going to be something else. And if you define success as this one single thing, then you lose sight of everything that happens between when you start and when you finish. And if you don't finish in the place where you thought you'd finish, then everything is a failure. So think of, because I'm Canadian, you think of professional hockey players as an example. Hardly a very, very small number of them actually achieve their dream, which is to win the Stanley Cup. It's very hard to do. Most professional hockey players, they play their entire career and never get close to the Stanley Cup. Does that mean that every one of those professional hockey players was a failure? I don't think so, right? It's probably not. But their goal is what's your goal this year? Win the Stanley Cup, win the Stanley Cup, win the Stanley Cup. And most of them never get there. but they are engaged deeply in the process of becoming the best hockey player they can be, the best teammate they can be, the best human being they can be, because they have this incredible privilege. They have lots of money, and then what do they do with that? Do they just buy 17 Ferraris, or they buy one Ferrari and then be active in the community? So this idea of being divorced from the outcome so that you can live in the moment and enjoy the process is incredibly important. And you can never actually get anywhere that you want to get without being firmly embedded in the now and in the process. And that is really the only true way to succeed. So you can paddle across the country one stroke at a time. It's very simple. It's a very dumb thing to do. You sit in a canoe and do this. But if I do that one thing long enough, you end up doing something, I guess, which you might consider to be extraordinary. Not that I've done it, but before me, there was First Nations people who did that sort of thing as a matter of, as a matter of course. They would travel these immense distances, not necessarily across Canada, but they traveled immense distances just out of necessity. They didn't think anything of it, but we think it's a big deal.
But still, in the same light, you're humbling yourself, I feel, which I've listened to you, and you do that a lot, and that's what I think I admire about you. It's one aspect of you that I admire. I think it's a very that's something that I think your dad would be proud of. I think your family would be proud of. You're self-deprecating, right? You don't give yourself enough credit. But I'll tell you what, other people around you, I suspect, have very high regards for the way you've lived your life, and the things that you've accomplished. So you have children, right?
Yes.
What 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 do you want them to remember about you?
I think what I would want my kids to remember about me is simply that I was passionate about the things that I did, and I didn't let anything stand in my way of those things that I thought were important, um, and that I did them for all the right reasons. So it's one thing to do something to please a sponsor, for example. Like everything I've ever done, I've eschewed any kind of sponsorship because I don't, firstly, I don't want people to say, well, Bert was able to do it because he got money from Nike or got money from Kuyu or got money from, Souris River Canoes, anything like that. Because that's an impediment to them, following their own dreams and goals, because it's an excuse not to do it because they don't have sponsorship. So no, you don't need a sponsor. And the other thing is wasn't beholden to a message other than my own message. So you're living a very authentic, true self. So yeah, Bert didn't do this because Souris River Canoes made him do it, or Souris River Canoes wanted him to show up at this place or that place and do that thing or this thing. He did it for reasons that were his own, and the reasons that were his own weren't weren't selfish. So I'm not doing, didn't do it to make money or anything like that at all. I did it for other reasons. So um, and those are very altruistic reasons. And I mentioned earlier that we have this moral imperative to do the hard thing. So doing the hard thing is there's something good about that. And you may not necessarily know what that good is when you set out to do it, but it's an easy um, setting out to do when you start to do the easy things that become easier and easier and easier. That's the very definition of a slippery slope. But if you choose to do something that's a little bit harder, then in the moment between the two things, then that typically leads you in the right direction. So um, I think I would want my children, I suppose, to say he did the hard things for all the right reasons.
And you're the son of a father who
Yeah.
I'm sure love a lot, and I'm sure, is your father still alive?
No, he passed away last year, actually. Yeah.
Do you think he'd be proud of what you've
Mm.
done?
Yeah, I think so. I think I know so because my father was he would never tell me that, but he would tell my sister that. So not that he would do it out of, it was just the way that old school European Dutch. There's not, you don't exchange a lot of emotions. But I know he was very proud of what I was able to do. And one of the beautiful things about doing something like this was, and typically, like I said, it's transformational ways you can't imagine, is that it brought it brought my father a lot closer to all his friends. because he was 95 or 94 when I finished the sorry, he was 92 when I finished the sailing trip, in 94 when I finished going across the country. But all those things and my other sailing trips, everything else I did, had brought him closer to his friends, far flung friends from all over the world. They all reached out to him because they heard about what I was doing in some way, shape, or form. And they reached out to him, which brought him an unbelievable amount of joy, because he had, some of these people he hadn't heard from in decades. Of course, they were all his friends, and when you get to be, 90 plus, your friends start to be winnowed. The number of them starts to be winnowed. So it was a real joy to see him reconnect with some of his old friends, and some of the friends of my mom as well. She had passed away earlier, so it was it that made the whole trip worthwhile, just to see, and certainly in one context, to see how much joy that brought him, and how much happiness that brought him, and how 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 much closer he came, or how, the reconnection, of course, brought him closer to the world that he once knew and had left behind when he was a younger man, or when they moved from here to there. And the same thing happened with my siblings. Suddenly all their old friends from high school and other work colleagues were calling him up, and so there's this it brought a lot of people together. It's just one of these unexpected consequences, and that was certainly one of the things that that helped, because my dad couldn't understand what I was doing. I mean, no one could, but when he saw what it brought to his life, and in this weird way, he said, "Well, clearly this is some good that's come of it, and if this is a good that comes from it, then this is a very good thing that has happened as a result."
You know, I think a lot of good has come from it, at least for me too. I mean, this is like, I'm so happy that I was able to interview you. I was reading your story, reading all this, and it's inspirational. It's a story I would tell my kids, people that I walk around and talk to. Your influence, it spiders out, and so on behalf of everyone that you've had a positive impact on, I appreciate that. I want to let you know.
That's a very kind thing to say, and it doesn't fall on deaf ears, that's for sure. It's been one of the best thing, that's honestly, in the same way that it was a good thing for my dad, it's been one of the best things for me, is to realize that something that I had done, and I wasn't starting out to do it, had a positive impact. It's a pretty good thing to wake up in the morning and think that you put a smile on someone's face. Like, that's a very positive. That's a very powerful and positive drug, if you will, to know that you can put a smile on someone's face because of they can relate in some way, shape, or form to what you've done, and it inspires them to do something in their life that you would never couldn't possibly imagine. And that's a very good reason to do something hard, if you think in some way, shape, or form that it might be inspirational in one way or another. And I guess if you look around you, there's lots of those sorts of things that have happened in other people's lives, in other contexts, but you can bring that to your own life. It can be, again, on any scale. And it's not that hard to do. You just have to think of a little bit outside the box, and I basically travel around the world with a smile on your face. That usually helps. Even though you might be wearing crazy camouflage, and stopped by the cops, you can still put a smile on their face.
Yeah, you can still bring some inspiration looking
Yeah,
like the Unabomber walking around.
exactly. Exactly.
Is there anything next? I mean, when are you gonna quit? You know what I
I'm
mean?
Yeah, well, I'm not. I'm still too young to quit. So I had big plans this spring, actually, but they kind of went sideways. So those plans are gonna have to wait. But in the very near future, I'm sailing a boat back from New Zealand straight back to Vancouver. So and then I have big plans for that boat, and I have big paddling plans as well. So um, I'm not quitting anytime soon, and my the dreams. Like, the paddling plans are very big, the sailing plans are very big, but there'll come a time when my plans are gonna narrow down a bit, and I certainly won't be doing them by myself, because there's a certain there's a certain reason to do that, but there's very, very many other reasons not to do it. So I'm looking forward to doing some to traveling, maybe not on a canoe, but certainly in the sailboat because it's a wonderful way to travel. So I'm looking forward to traveling with, certainly my partner and certainly with my siblings and other people. So it'll be a while yet, but I might scaling things back because I'm not a young man anymore by any stretch. Actually qualify for the seniors discount on the ferry, so
Oh, I see.
as much as much as I don't want to be old, I'm gonna I guess wrangle it for all it's worth.
Yeah, you're gonna scale it back when you started at when you're 60.
Yeah,
Like that is just you did. I mean, that is incredible. I love it. I love it, Bert.
good.
So, thank you so much for taking the time to let me, have this talk. I had a great time. I learned so much. It's an honor for me to be able to, ask you these questions and spend some time with you.
Okay.
I just want to say thank you, and I'm going to be following you to see if you ever do anything else.
Oh yeah.
I'd like to know what that is, and maybe I can have you on after if you ever do some of those things.
Yeah, I'd love to get back on again and it's been wonderful. It's been fantastic to talk with you today. It's like I said, it always brings a different perspective to what I've done. And again, it's been a real treat to be here. And I hope we get a chance to talk again, and we'll talk about something else that's good and crazy.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Bert. I appreciate it.
Okay,
Okay.
thank
All
you.
right. Bye bye.